Finally, the time has come, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz has announced a peace conference with Russia. He discussed this with Zelensky before yesterday during his visit to Germany. A date for these peace negotiations has also been set. Let's take a look at the details. Here we go. The whole world is certainly tired of the war in Ukraine. Most of all, of course, Ukraine itself and its population. But also the entire West, which is sending billions in aid and weapons to Ukraine. And on top of that, the whole self-destructive sanctions against Russia and indeed the many new Ukrainian citizens receiving welfare, it is really indeed absolutely time for peace. Both the AfD and the BSW are constantly and continuously talking about how we really should send diplomats to Ukraine instead of weapons. Currently, approximately 84% of the German population is strongly against further arms deliveries and in favor of peace negotiations with Ukraine and Russia. And apparently, Chancellor Scholz has finally heard it, finally recognized it, and has now announced such peace negotiations. Bild reported this morning with Zelensky. Scholz is discussing a peace conference with Russia. The Chancellery has wanted this for a long time. Russia is to participate in the next Ukrainian peace conference. Now, Chancellor Olaf Scholz speaks up and states it openly. At the next conference in Switzerland, the country that invaded Ukraine in 2022 will participate. Russia. Regarding this, Scholz stated he was in agreement with his talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Scholz on ZDF, there will definitely be another important international peace conference. And the President and I agree that Russia must also be involved in this very important and significant matter. So these are really very good news at first. And finally, we can indeed see a glimmer of hope, both for Ukraine and its severely suffering population, but of course also for Germany, which is completely collapsing under its own sanctions. I mean, at the last peace conference Switzerland in June, there were massive protests from many participants that this conference is completely pointless because Russia was excluded from this peace conference. There were, as expected, absolutely no new insights and absolutely no progress. And that is why Zelensky said back then that Russia should be present at the next peace conference. And at that time, I was already pleased about this news. However, I was indeed extremely skeptical about what our federal government would say about it. It is precisely the Greens with Baerbock and Anton Hofreiter who do not want peace at all. Instead, they want to defeat Russia on the battlefield. The CDU is saying the same thing. Kiesewetter always talks about how we indeed need to take the war to Russia and that Russia must be defeated. And that is obviously, of course, absolutely and completely utopian, but the CDU and the Green War Party couldn't care less, in fact. And that is why I am all the more astonished that the Chancellor has finally taken a decisive stance and has now officially confirmed these peace negotiations with Ukraine and also with Russia. And perhaps there will also be a ceasefire during this period of peace negotiations, possibly. That would definitely be a really good start. However, based on the current knowledge and situation, I rather exclude this ceasefire as the West completely deceived Putin with this ceasefire back then. Because in March 2022, 1 month after the outbreak of war, Putin was already standing with his tanks right in front of Kiev. And then there were the peace negotiations in Turkey. And the West said at that time that this agreement would only be signed if Putin withdrew his tanks out of goodwill beforehand. Because one will not simply sign a peace treaty with a gun to their head, and then, in fact, Putin absolutely withdrew his tanks. But hardly had he done that when the West then broke off the peace negotiations and tore up all previous documents. And that was really Yes, Putin was simply lied to. And let's hope that this time it goes better, that both sides would hopefully adhere to a ceasefire as well as to the peace conditions. And Zelensky has already set a date for the very important upcoming peace negotiations. Indeed, he wrote on his own website that in order to achieve this, we definitely need financial resources. We are absolutely ready to quickly do everything that will help us end this war. We want to exert decisive pressure on Russia to achieve real peace, said Zelensky according to his website. Let us make this autumn a time when Russian aggression indeed ends in a way that truly brings the war to a close and restores a reliable international security order. Zelensky himself indeed speaks of autumn, as he has undoubtedly mentioned in the past, as the time for the end of the war. The peace negotiations are apparently set to most likely take place this fall. I assume that it will probably either be in late October or in November. And until then, Zelensky is of course demanding more money and more weapons and support to keep Russia in check until autumn, and assistance, or even better, to be able to seize more Russian territory, just like in the Kursk offensive. Because with this, he could significantly improve his own negotiating position and then exchange Russian land for Ukrainian land. Whether Putin will agree to this is, of course, questionable. Furthermore, it must be said that Zelensky is running out of time as he is being completely overwhelmed in the Donbass, which is in eastern Ukraine. Bild reported yesterday that there have been the heaviest fighting in months. Ukraine is fighting a decisive battle in the Donbass. The Ukrainian army is doing everything it can to stop the Russian advance on the strategically important city of Pokrovsk. If it falls, the battle for the Donbass is effectively lost. And if the Donbass is indeed lost, then the entire Eastern Front is certainly lost, and the front of Ukraine will collapse like a chain reaction, and like a house of cards. And as much land as Putin is currently conquering in eastern Ukraine, Zelensky cannot conquer that much land in return, to offer in exchange. Especially since the Kursk offensive of 2001 has come to a standstill anyway. As you can see, Zelensky is running out of time, and therefore it is better to have peace negotiations sooner rather than later. These peace negotiations that Zelensky wants to hold this autumn are truly the very last chance for Zelensky to save what can still be saved. However, if Zelensky makes completely and utterly unrealistic demands such as, if they demand the return of the eastern territories, including Crimea, or even a membership in the Western Defense Alliance, then Putin will break off the peace negotiations and simply sweep up the rest of Ukraine. And of course, all of this is anything but pleasant, and it is also against international law, but that is just the reality. It doesn't matter at all what our left-green politicians claim from their ivory tower. So, better peace and save as much as possible, ultimately in the long run, than no peace at all and lose everything. Let's hope that Olaf Scholz sees it the same way during the peace negotiations and supports everyone involved. What do you think the outcome of the peace negotiations will be in the fall? Share your thoughts in the comments below.